Next, I'd like to introduce our final fireside chat with Dan Pickett and Heidi Knobloch. Dan is he was the CEO of Apta Health, and it's really my honor to introduce them. Dan is a regional celebrated venture-backed founder with deep roots in upstate New York, and Heidi, a leader in regional entrepreneurial development. They will reflect today. Dan is actually grew up in Mechanicville. I always wonder what is in the water in that little city because we have had so many successful people come out of the city of Mechanicville, which is in Saratoga County, just south of us. Dan studied at RPI and has launched multiple successful startups. He's now leading the charge at Hudson River Capital, but he brings valuable insights into what it takes to build and scale innovative companies outside of major tech hubs. And Heidi, who is currently spearheading the New York Venture Readiness Program at the Center for Economic Growth, CEG, in partnership with Launch New York. And they're going to explore some of the unique challenges and opportunities of growing a high impact startup in upstate New York. In this conversation, you'll gain a candid look at the evolution of regional innovation ecosystems and the lessons Dan's learned from his entrepreneurial milestones. So please welcome Dan and Heidi. Thank you.
All right.
Test.
Testing. Am I on? I'm on.
Am I on? Yep.
Yeah.
We're good.
Oh, great.
Let's do it.
Um, so obviously Shelby saved the best for last, I have to say. I sent Dan questions for this at about 8:30 this morning, but I feel confident in doing that because every single time I told someone this week that Dan Pickett and I were going to be on a panel, they said, "Oh, that's going to be really good. He's a great conversationalist." So you got a lot to live up to here. So yeah, so for everyone in the audience, do you want to just talk about what your first entrepreneurial endeavor was and what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I should read some big safe harbor statement before I start, but as I sit up here, I think this is like one man's opinion and experience, and everybody's experiences are, I think, well, there's some commonalities. They're really unique. So just quickly, um, I went to mechanical high school locally, and then I always said RPI when you went to mechanical was like 13th grade because it was like 20 minutes down the road, and it was like another the next step in education. But it was a great experience for me. I think that I was always, I mean, I'm an engineer out of RPI, and was always a problem solver. And then out of RPI, I got a job at KeyCorp on the investment banking side. I did banking integration. So, the bank would buy a bank and we would go in and integrate the bank. And I integrated the technology side because I knew technology. Um, when we did our last big deal, which was we merged with Society in Cleveland, and KeyCorp moved from Albany to Cleveland, they they discontinued the M&A function because we weren't going to do any more acquisitions. We were going to do a big integration, and I got a job there as believe it or not, as the vice president of advanced technology, like at 24 years old, which was terrific. But my first venture came out of that. They had had a partnership with Cigna, the big insurance company, on the property and casualty side. Cigna used to underwrite a lot of the loans when you needed, collateral insured around the loans. Cigna was the carrier that sat on that risk, and the process by which they managed that was absolutely horrible. And the two companies decided that they were going to do a joint venture. So I, of course, inherited that joint venture. I looked at it, started working on it, and this is the way my first venture started. I gave a presentation in Buffalo. The CEO of Cigna's financial services business was there. And when the presentation ended, it ended on a stormy night, like, I don't even know, 6 p.m. I rushed to the airport. You used to take like a little propeller plane from Buffalo back to Albany then. The thing's bouncing around in a storm, like you're saying prayers that we're even going to make it to Albany. And I pulled a card out and it says, Marty Gentleman, Chief Executive Officer, Cigna Financial Services. And he told me to call him. So I called him, and Marty said, that was a great presentation. We've enjoyed all of our, partnership with KeyCorp, but I've just got a very simple question. Do you think you could think of exactly what we need to do for you to get you to quit KeyCorp and come to work for us after one presentation? That's what the guy, he said to me. So I remember the day I was in my office in Key Corp. There was barely email, so you had to use a fax. So I sent a fax to their headquarters with the terms that I would go to work for them. And I was so nervous that when I hit send and you know, start to go through really slow, if you're that old, you people here know it goes through really, really slow. And I ran from the fax machine because I was afraid I was going to hit stop and like because I sent it through anyways, and he got it and he said, "Oh, thanks for sending. I got to talk to the CEO of the holding company tomorrow." And he literally called me at like 10 o'clock the next morning. He said, "Put in your resignation." Right. So that's and that company was called Cigna Software Sciences. It launched in 1996. Um, and what we did was it was all problem solving, right? We took that whole underwriting process that was very manual and basically platformed it all. And within 24 months, we signed up, you know, 5 of the top 8 banks in the US, and sort of the rest was history. So I would say the summary answer is it was complete coincidence of meeting him in that environment. And, you know, we did a good job, but and then I think, you know, acting on opportunity. I think being opportunistic in a lot of these things we talk about is really, really important. But that I don't even know if I would be here if it weren't for that meeting, that flight, the whole thing that came together. It was pretty unique, but that's how the whole thing started.
And so if you take App to Health, and just creating App to Health, or you can pick another venture too. You can pick whatever you want. But how are you going about identifying a problem, validating it, grabbing customers? I think yesterday we heard that, the underlying theme of a lot of the conversation yesterday was that to support startups, what we need to do is support them getting customers, not support them in other ways, which I think we can all argue whether or not that is the case. But for you, how are you identifying a problem so narrowly that you could get your first customers?
Yeah, all of the things that I've done have just come out of, I think, like either personal experience, direct personal experience, or an introduction to someone that's experiencing something and is maybe thinking about it in a different way. Um, so if you know, if I look at, for instance, Apti Health's a behavioral health company, focuses on patients that are complex, high acuity, very high cost for health plans, right? So you think of a health plan, maybe 20%, and a big focus on Medicaid, where there's a lot of health equity issues. Um, and if you think about a plan and there's something called their medical loss ratio, they have like 20% of the members of the plan drive like 80% of the cost. And we focus on, you know, those 20%. And, you know, that was the way that came about is I had someone tell me that there was this really, you know, innovative doctor that was thinking about a different way to care for very complex behavioral health patients. I love science, so there was a lot of science behind the way this doctor, Dr. Alex Marcel, approached this problem. And, you know, he was a believer, and his science was all based on the fact that the more you knew about a patient, the more, you know, personalized you could make their care plan, and the more informed you could make their care team and create, you know, a relationship with that patient that would be more motivating and they would engage more, which is a big battle when you're trying to keep, you know, people engaged in programs that can really make a difference because the tenure of the program matters. And everything he was doing was being done manually. So the intro was, you know, Dan, you're an engineer, you know software, you build platforms. It would be great if you teamed up with this doctor, and you know, platformed what he's doing and bring it to market. And, you know, that company, you know, went through a seed round, a series A round. It went through a B round, probably raised as much money locally as almost anybody's raised about $75 million to date. Um, and became a really special company and is today that's impacting, you know, 15,000 patients a year. More importantly, like their families and everybody that cares about, you know, one of the members of their family that has a really complex behavioral health issue that impacts everything, right? So the reward from it's been great. But another one, it was an intro of things coming together, and I think complementary skills coming together to let it progress through the stages you need to progress through to make it to scale.
Is there anybody who's come to you in that way, kind of the serendipitous way that you're talking about with a problem that you've been like, nah, that's not worth tackling that's not worth solving? I'm sorry this wasn't on the questions, but it's something I'm interested in.
Yeah, yeah, no, probably all the time.
All the
A
time.
lot, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have like 160 text messages now that I didn't respond to. And yeah, you try and find the time to get to them, but you never do, but I will. Maybe this weekend. But yeah, I think all the time. I mean, to me, I mean, there's investors and people that support investors and bankers in here. Determination is probably number one. These rides are not easy. There's a lot of sacrifice um, that's sort of part of the journey. There's a lot of sacrifice that's part of the journey. There's a lot of you know, hard work. You realize how many hours are in a day when you're making those sacrifices. So if you want to make a game or you want to do something and you're in Philly and you need to get to Albany and the flight gets canceled and it's snowing and it's like, okay, I'm getting in the car and I'm doing it because I'm not going to miss that, right? That moment. So there's a lot of that. So I think as I look at it, I'm a firm believer that it's the people first. It's like the who first, the who way before the what. So you gotta sync with the who. And then I think, you need to really look. I mean, it's got to be a big problem that who you're backing is solving, and they've got to solve it in a unique way. And then you look at the team. Who do they have around, and do they have the wherewithal to know that as you go through the journey and the phases, the team's going to change? It's highly likely you're going to go through two or three teams as you go from C to A to B to maybe even further. So I think you have to have that feel. But I would tell you, like one of the things that makes me like the most proud of the journey is if I look at the number of people that were part of our companies, it started with infrastructure, which, was a company that started in the basement of my parents' liquor store and ended up being, $150 million ARR company that sold to a, $2 billion private company and is now, just about a $3 billion private company in tech. Now it's right at the center of the universe because it builds, hyperscaler data centers, designs them and builds them. So um, I think, you know, it really is the right people. And as you go through the journey, learning that, and then that problem has to be big. And then everybody in here, you have to not run out of money as you're trying to get there. And that's easier said than done, especially in, today's environment is way, way easier said than done.
That's a good segue into this next question. So, what signals do you think funders need to start seeing upstate New York as a place that has good venture backable deal flow?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's results. I mean, I always start the way I think about that is I think that results are number one. You have to see progress, and it could be early stage results where somebody's built an MVP, and it just they built it in the context of a big problem, and they hit that milestone. They've made it. Um, but what I think, and then you could look at results, each step of the way, seed through A through B. And, obviously the expectations increase. You've got to get through a proof of concept and then you got to prove your unit economics. And, then you've got to prove, you can scale. And then you get that growth equity or private equity money to really scale. Um, so, you know, the results along the way really, really matter. But I think more important is I look at it like the results are driven by people that are solving that big problem that bring tremendous insight into and unique insight into how they're solving it and can execute on it, right? And that if you look at the end, the product of that is the result. But I work all the way back and look at, okay, is it that, problem that when solved is going to make a big difference? And what does the team look like around it? And are they, you know, increasingly getting more things right than not along the journey. And then those are the ones that I think are special and you're attracted to.
So, something we talked about briefly before this panel is, you know, w- one of the places that I see founders struggling is that you'll have founders who are not venture backable. They never will be. They're just not solving something that is going to produce a return for an investor, but they could still use some type of risk capital. And I see this oftentimes in the capital region, but actually all across New York State. And the way that I think some people try to solve that problem is, oh, we need to create a little venture fund in our community, right? We need to create a venture fund in Rochester. We need to create a venture fund in Albany, and ultimately they're not solving the problem because there aren't venture backable companies there. There's plenty of venture funds to send those companies to if they're right for venture. If so, the question would be, Do you see any other kind of capital structures that are a little bit more creative that, super early stage companies that maybe need like $100,000 for a pilot project that you see maybe funders in this room or other people starting to put into the marketplace?
A big question, I think. So we went, a couple of the companies went through that alternative, right? So that sort of the non-equity when getting started, like funding. Um, so even the Apti Health company was a good example. So here's sort of the way the process worked, and we should talk about that one because with everybody in the room, I think that's an interesting journey where I could have done better to make it more local and candidly didn't. Probably because we don't engage in enough things. Like we don't know who the people are. Just to be honest with you, like who the local players that could have been part of the journey are. But the way this process worked is like it worked like this, right? I meet the doctor. The doctor's in Troy. I was the CEO of infrastructure. He needed to build an MVP, the platform to actually deliver this care model. We built it at infrastructure for free. It probably cost us a couple $100,000. There was no cloud then. We ran it on our servers in our data center. And I said to Dr. Marcel, you need to go out and sign up some customers. And the idea then was that primary care physicians would refer patients that needed behavioral health to us through the platform. We would care for them and everybody would win. The patient would get better treatment. The doctor who doesn't do behavioral health, right, will be able to focus on primary care. We'd collaborate together, integrating the primary care with the behavioral care to improve the life, right? Reduce symptom, improve function, and take that patient and help them live the life that they deserve, right? A healthier life. So I said to Alex, go out and sign up the doctors. He came back and he said, I signed up 8 primary care physicians, including Iron Gate and Glens Falls that had like 40 doctors, right? So it was a big deal. And I said to him, how many did you call on? And he's like, 8. I'm like, you were 8 for 8? You know, yeah, 8 for 8. And I said to him, you're not even a sales guy. Like he is not a sales guy. He's a doctor. So he signed up all 8. And then we needed to get closer to the health plan. So we went down to CDPHP, and this is where the alternative financing comes in. We went to CDPHP, sat with Dr. Bennett, who was the CEO then. We sat with Dr. Marinello, who was the chief medical officer then, Dr. Fernandez, who ran psychiatry, and they loved it, right? And they loved it because they were in a spot where they've been approaching behavioral health the same way for since they started that health plan. There was a whole network of people. They make referrals without any method to the madness. There's no collaboration back. Like when you go out, there's no, two-way flow of data. And we needed money. So they were, of our first investors and put, in a strategic investment, put $1.5 million into the company. They were going to spend it anyways, right? So really with these companies, it was just a matter of them looking at capital that they already had budgeted and redirecting it to, instead of sending the 1.5 million to, a whole bunch of fragmented providers out there, they were going to direct and 1.5 million was their total spend in BH was about 100 million. So you're talking like 2% of their spend. And they took it, directed it to us. The 2 million, almost 2 million that came to us was huge because now we had, revenue flow that we could bring in, drive some margin on it and invest it back in the business. So we did that. It happened with the Cigna deal on the fintech company, the same thing. Cigna got involved early because they liked it and they put like 5 million into it before we ever went out and, did any more advanced, capital raising. But then like if just on the question with Apti Health, we went through that. Then we did about a $15 million Series A. CDPHP participated in that. There was some big, you know, family offices that I had worked with in the infrastructure days that participated. I participated substantially. But then with that, we signed some health plan contracts. So, again, what proved the model more, started to prove out the unit economics. So that was a company where, and this is where I think as investors and bankers, your companies need help. We were very naive, just to be clear. So our gross margins in that business when we started those first 8 physician practices, gross margin was negative 20%. In today's world, that's like the road right to the ground, right into the ground. It's the death spiral. The margins in the business today are approaching 40%, right? So huge, but it's because of focus and helping investors asking, tough questions. But then we took the company to market in 2023, 2022 for what was a, $50 million B round. And to make a long story short, we had a whole bunch of term sheets. We turned down term sheets from GV, Google Ventures. We turned term sheets down from Oak. We turned a couple of strategic acquisitions down. We had to be clear, I don't even know, 150 growth equity firms say, no, we're out. But then at the end of the day, we put a syndicate together that was led by Takeda. So Takeda's, in Kendall Square, Cambridge, their VC arm took the biggest piece, took almost $18 million of the round. Vista, the big PE firm, took a big chunk of the round. Pivotal, which is a big Hong Kong-based family office, took 18 million of the round. And then a couple of other smaller but important players, Claritas, which is a healthcare growth equity fund in Nashville. So we put together a really, really great syndicate that put together a great board, and we had a board meeting this week. Every PE firm will come to Saratoga in August, by the way. If you want to bring the big ones in, they will all come. Like it's just this place, it works. But so we learned along the way, and we never would have made it so far, any of these companies, without really good investors and boards that are not afraid to bring, that are built carefully, right, with the right diversity of skills and experience, because it just is so necessary to make sure you cover all the bases. And so that was a big part of how these companies grew.
So one of the things that I see a lot is companies will be able to raise a seed round or a Series A, but they'll hit this Series A wall. So they won't be able to raise after that Series A, or they'll hit a round and even let's just assume that they make their milestones and that they're doing well and all of that. In upstate New York, there isn't access to this kind of, you had mentioned the syndicate that you put together, right? Which is I, as I heard you list them, none of them are even close to upstate New York. Boston is your closest firm that's investing. So for companies beyond, just assume people are hitting their milestones, assume people are pretty doing well with their business. How do you see upstate New York companies attracting Series B financing?
I think there's probably multiple ways to do it. One is the CEO of the company and maybe the CFO. They need to be active. They need to take that as, first of all, when you raise your A, like I think you have to go bimodal. You have to be thinking about the things you need to do to deliver on your promises, right? The commitment you made on the A, but you have to be thinking about the next round, right? Because you just do. Even if there's some potential exit after the A that's in the forward view, you have to think about the next fundraising round. And the time to raise money is when you don't need to raise money. It's to be out there talking to people and telling the story so that they understand it. So at first, I think it's the job of the CEO and the executives that are able to do it. And typically at an A, there's very few that can do it, right? So maybe you have one or two people in the company that can. And if you don't, you probably have a problem with the company, right? So it's just, I don't know how they would make it through the A if the A people don't think they could ultimately raise a B, right? Or lead a strategic process and convince a buyer to come in and buy them out. And then I do think it's your investor. So whoever's on the cap table, the institutions on the cap table are really important because they have networks, and everyone knows if someone writes checks for 5, 10, 15 million, you all do, people that write checks for 25 or 30 or 35 million. Those are the intros you need to make. We've had a lot of cases too where we've talked to someone that writes a $30 million check and they said, that's not right for us. But I found the community, like the growth equity, private equity community, to be, well, it's competitive as hell. They also are collaborative because they need to syndicate and bring other people into these deals. So I've regularly had people say, not right for us, but you should talk to Mary, or not right for us, talk to Mike. And I think that's really important. And then I think the bankers are important too, having those banking relationships. I've been pleased on the banking side. I've never had like a segment of the industry work harder without any commitment to anything. Like it seems to be the process is they will offer a lot of counsel, for a future down the road. And we regularly talk to, 2, 3, 4, 5 bankers. And at the end of the day, we've only worked with one or two of them, right? And then the conferences help. I mean, I've gotten a lot of mileage out of, and I don't know if you all have the opportunity, but if I will go to like Leerink's conference or I go to Barclays conference and get there and meet all the different, investors that are partners with those banks, that's been a great conduit. Maybe for some of the big, well, it depends. Like Leerink would be a little bit of a smaller check. You go to Barclays, you got bigger checks because they need bigger deals. And then, if you hit like the mecca of somebody like a Morgan Stanley or a Chase or a B of A, right, or a Jeffries, like I think those things matter. I think where you all can help is helping educate the operators on how that works, right? Because they don't know. They're every day they're in there trying to help their companies survive and help their companies thrive. So I think that's what we've done.
So in economic development, we kind of talk about this entrepreneurial ecosystem. That's a word that's thrown around a lot. And so I have a question about whose role it is to help develop that entrepreneurial ecosystem. So you're an exited founder, so there's a role for you. We have a number of venture firms in the audience. Excel Partners, David Brown is doing Impellent Ventures. They participate a lot in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And then we have institutions like New York Ventures, which is funded by New York State government. And obviously we're sitting in Upstate Capital, who is also a player in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So if you could, I just invite you to talk a little bit about the role of exited founders, because that's you, and about others in developing entrepreneurs in upstate New York.
Yeah. I think it probably takes the village in terms of who's responsible. I don't know who's first, candidly. I knew that like sort of that question, but I'm not sure who's first. As I think about it, I think it takes the the investors. I think it takes the banks. I think it takes associations that got us here today, right, as part of that process. I think it takes also on the higher ed side, someone like an RPI. I sit as a trustee at RPI. Bob's here. Bob brings incredibly smart people to our dinners. He brought some Quantum Club students to the last dinner we had, and I'm the only one that said, does anyone have any idea what that 18-year-old just said? And the answer is no one did, right? Everyone's supposed to be so smart. No one knew a thing. It was incredible. I think it takes that. And then, if you look like at Hudson River Capital, we just closed a transaction back in March, a company called Worldwide Professional Solutions. And they do in the semiconductor space, they do professional services for building really complex semiconductor facilities. So very concentrated market, customers, TSMC, Intel, Samsung, Texas Instruments, right? Companies like that. Micron, right? All the big builds you see going on. Um, and back to like the networking mattering. That company got bought by New Mountain. Everybody's New Mountain, really large PE firm, right? Right. They wrote a really big check. I mean, the company was a 9+ figure deal. Um, it started at Deloitte was the sell side banker, Deloitte Corporate Finance. And it started by that company being invited to like a Deloitte speed dating session with investors. And I was in the room when it happened. We were in Dallas. And we walk into the room, and the New Mountain people are sitting at the table, and you have 15 minutes to tell your story. And you have a one pager, right? You're basically your teaser, like your clear, concise, compelling fact sheet on why this company matters. And to make a long story short, that went from that meeting to a process to probably a dozen IOIs, 6 LOIs, New Mountain winning the battle and the deal closing in March after probably a 9-month process. But to think that it started back with like speed dating between the companies and the private equity firms, that is where it started. New Mountain said, we've got a portfolio company, a company called Cumming that builds airports, does professional services like they're at JFK and did LaGuardia, things like that. But looking at it saying this would be a great addition to that company, and just everything worked, the way it should work. Now, there were a lot of other companies that submitted LOIs that were close, but you have to have that so that you can get a good feel for what the boundaries are and what, good is, but what great is. And it was a great, marriage of two businesses and two cultures. But I think like that combination of organizations that care and that have shared values. But it does need, to your point, like someone to orchestrate it and keep the momentum. And that's where I seem so busy and buried in the weeds that I don't think about that. But, and then I think there's others, like that have experienced the things we've experienced that will come to the table and help. I think if you make it more efficient for them, the better it will be.
And just one quick follow-up. So I know you weren't here yesterday, but we had a presenter that basically said that attorneys should fill in the blanks and shut up and not advise companies. And I was personally a little offended by that. And I know a couple of other people in the room who are a little offended by that. And we have a couple of good CPAs and accountants in here who advise early stage companies. So if you could just, as a follow-up, talk about maybe positively, just so we can save Shelby's sponsorships, if you could talk a little positively about, your experience with service providers.
Yeah, we would never be where we are without the amazing attorneys that have helped us with everything and not made a single mistake. Been incredible. Yeah, agree. Yeah. We love attorneys. We love them. The higher the bill rate, the better. They must be smarter. So there you go. All right, Shelby, we got all the attorneys back.
Yeah.
Bankers too. Bankers are incredible. We love the bankers. Accountants, are they in here? The tax people and everybody. No. Yeah, I mean, so that's an interesting one. I'll give you a quick on attorneys. I mean, if you think about that syndicate that I talked about, literally every tech firm from Covington to Cooley to, who the heck did we use? Cooley, Gates Company. We had every firm in there because every investor's got their own firm, and it's like, it doesn't end. Oh, Goodwin, the last one, and the bill rates are they're good bill rate. Their offices are great because that's why the bill rates are great. They let you have free board meetings there, which is really good because you look really special in those rooms. No, that is one of the things that I think one of the other things that I was thinking about what I would say and like how knowing that there's less companies, more investors here and bankers and folks that support the companies. I think that, you know, typically the founders, the company will focus very narrowly on the product, and where they need help is, in allocating their time, that it's not all product, right? It's the administrative things that you need to do, right? Compliance things, audit and control things, the tax things, accounting and tax things, the legal things you need to do. Because, if you want your companies to make it through each one of these stages and you get into diligence with, the adults in the investing world, that diligence is going to be, it's going to be thorough. And if you don't have it done, you're going to get traded down or they're going to be out of a deal. So I think that advice, and they need to do it in a way, that doesn't, bleed them, right? It may have them run out of money, but I think that part of it is really important. And I think that's things like that these groups can do because everybody is vulnerable to making those mistakes because you typically, like think of when anybody tells you about this great idea they have. The idea is the product. It's always the product. And then there's the whole concept that I firmly believe in is that very quickly in the company, sales matters more than the product, right? Sales matters more than the product. If you think about Silicon Valley, you think about Boston, you think about Austin, you think about New York, they say the roadside is littered with amazing products that nobody figured out how to sell. And they burn themselves right into the ground, right? So that part's real, and that's the advice I think that the companies need. Burn right now, like, I mean, I have this line where, don't burn while you learn. Burn when you're growing. Do not burn when you're learning. Like keep your burn down to as near zero as you can while you're learning the things before you can actually start to sell things and grow. And you'll see companies that they have that great idea, they raise some money, and if the board isn't doing their job, they spend all their money on the product, and then they have when it's time to actually do something, they don't have any more money. And then to go out and raise it again is hard. You all also need to educate the companies on how important market forces are and financial market forces, right? Go back 4 years ago, right? Companies are raising at, 8 times FTM on the revenue side. That's what we raised our B at, 8x. Now they're trading at 2.5, maybe if you're good, 2 if you're not, or, maybe 3 if you're really good, not 8. And 8 was even if you were really good, might have been 10. So you have a company doing, 12 million in ARR that's got a, 120, $140 million pre-money. That $12 million company there, you're lucky if you get, a $20 million pre-money. It's hard. But that's where the, people, the entrepreneurs, a lot of times, and even if they've done it, 2 times or 3 times, you haven't necessarily experienced all of that stuff. So the advice is absolutely, um, critical to the companies. And when I think back, I think about all the little just statements that have come out of our board members. We had a great one at Infrastructure, and we were rocking and rolling. We were making so much money, and our board meeting ended. And there's a local attorney, John Lemry, was on our board. John, amazing attorney, but also John is whatever comes in John's mind, he says it, right? He'll just say it. He doesn't even care. It could hurt the feelings of the entire community, the room, everybody. John will say it, right? So he says at the board meeting, he goes, uh, we're ignoring a very serious problem. And he says, we are making an incredible amount of money, but does anyone not see we can't count it? We're not able to count the money we're making. He goes, we need to improve accounting. And literally the board was there. And it's like, you know what? John's right. I mean, we probably should have talked about it at the beginning of the meeting, not the meeting after we already shook hands. And he brought it up. It was literally done. And I kid you not, we went from that meeting within 30 days, we completely revamped accounting. And, the DSO went from, 120 days down to 60, and just everything. The balance sheet improved, the cash position improved. And it was because he had the courage and the knowledge and experience to bring it. But that's what those companies need, right? It's like sales matters more than product. Getting your plan around sales and distribution in early, even earlier than you think you need to, and at least getting someone out there that can go have the conversations to hear from the market and play it back to the team and the board on, what, not only what, because typically your customers tend to be friendly, the early ones, if you're building, co-creating with them. But then when you need to get out and really scale and you don't know them or have certain affinity, you need to stand on your own. It's good to get out there and hear, just the brutal facts, and the good, the bad, and the ugly about what they think, so that you can come back and make the changes you need to continue to grow.
So I'm a big believer that everybody needs a creative outlet. So some people golf, some people play pickleball, all that. So as a lot of people in this room know, I'm starting a podcast. This podcast is called The Founder's Fridge, and we talk to successful entrepreneurs about what they were eating while they were building their company. It's a nod to I used to run a restaurant, as you know, and so to ask you, so what are you eating while you're building these big companies? Like what's your food of choice?
Yeah, I'm not answering. How much time do we have? 1 more minute. All right. I'm not answering directly. I will at the end. So I was on a call earlier this week with a corporate banking. We use Chase. So I was on a call with Jamie Dimon. He was in the boardroom in New York, and he had on a blue sports coat and a blue shirt, and he had a microphone, and which I loved, he had one other thing that matched his outfit, a bottle of Saratoga water. And I'm like, who did that product placement? And they had all their private clients and big corporate on it. I'm like, shit, that's really good for us. It's like, you already can't get a room or anything or walk in town, you can tell. But now Jamie's sitting there in front of everybody, and he took like 6 drinks from the Saratoga water. But he didn't even get asked the question. Like, he now really doesn't give a shit about anything. He'll say whatever he wants. And in the beginning, they say he may be the CEO of a Chase, but whatever he says has nothing to do with Chase. They're his personal opinions, right? And it's like, okay, really? But they asked him the question. He goes, I don't golf. I've never golfed. I can't play tennis because I hurt my back. And he goes, but we have a house upstate. We all go up there. The family goes up there. We love to cook. So you asked the question to like a family of cooks. My son, Dan, is out there. The guy, stand up. I have to call him out. He calls kids out. I see he's Dan the fourth. I'm Dan the third. Software engineer from Northeastern, makes me incredibly proud. He's rocking and rolling at Toast so that you all get restaurant reservations. And instead of spending $100 on dinner, he'll make you spend 300 because they, up the ticket price. No, so we cook. Like, we love to cook. So the answer to that is probably something green. Yeah, we're big greens, like escarole or broccoli rabe or broccolini. I cook a lot of that because you get it's a little filling, but it's healthy. And then we're a protein shop. We got this new grill, and it's like we almost burned some things down the first time because it burns really hot. But yeah, and muscle milk.
So in interviewing entrepreneurs, there's only two sides of the spectrum. Either people are like, I eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and Pop Tarts and I never cook anything, or there's the other side, which is I love to cook. It's a respite for what I'm doing. And so I think you fall in that category.
Yeah. Shelby knows, back in one interview at Global Foundries, I got the chance to do this with Steve Wozniak. So just
Well,
sitting
I'm
on
better than
stage with
Steve
Steve.
Wozniak, don't you think?
Yeah, no, way better. Any attorneys are way better. Yeah, we love attorneys. So quickly, the panel starts, and there were like 5 questions, and Woz answered all 5 of the questions. You didn't get a chance to say anything. My people are out there going, "This is going to be embarrassing. Dan's never going to talk. He's going to sit up there." But at one point, um, Wozniak says, he goes, "Well, when Steve and I were in the garage, eating TV dinners, playing video games, working on Apple, blah 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 blah." So, um, I said, my only comment to that was, well, I said, what we were doing at night is not eating TV dinners, playing video games. I said, we were hanging out in the bars of downtown Troy at RPI. And I just said, maybe that's why infrastructure is not as valuable as Apple. And of everything we said in the entire interview, that's the only quote that made the newspaper. It's like there was a little moment of levity, but no TV dinners. Those guys were TV dinner guys.
Right.
It
Right.
worked, obviously.
Well, thanks so much, Dan, and now I think we're all going to the track, right?
Yeah, thanks everybody. Appreciate it.